Good morning, good afternoon, and good night, wherever you're tuning in. We are Slava and Jonathan, bringing you the Side Quest podcast, where we talk about character development, stories, and all things that are world building. And we occasionally take side quests, because, frankly, that's how conversations work. Just as a reminder, this whole show is spoiler heavy. So sit back, tune in, and join us on this episode of Side Quest. Good morning, adventurers. Welcome back to Side Quest. We're excited today to bring you part 3 of Ghostwater, and we have a special edition. We're having a 5-person chat about Ghostwater. We've got brand new guest and some old familiars. But first, your regular curmudgeon, Slava.
Hey, Jonathan.
Hey, Slava. Who do you want to introduce? Pick your fighter.
Let's introduce the new guy.
New guy.
With us, we have JT, or Jeremy, who is Casey's brother.
Mm-hmm.
He is our resident scholar, as you called him in the previous episode, of all things Zenzia and Vuya. I think I pronounced those wrong, but we're going with it. And he is an avid reader of Cradle. Welcome, JT.
Thank you, Slava. In addition to having been Casey's brother, I currently am Casey's brother as well. But yes, I got interested in this literature a few years ago, and I've read not just Cradle, but a lot of the genre that it is based on. A huge amount of it, in fact.
It talked my ear off.
Very nice.
Did you get into Cradle before the books were done, or after they were already, 12 books was out?
After. I got into them right at Christmas time last year, and I read the entirety of it in the next month and a half.
Nice. All right. My fighter will be Spencer, or as I've mistyped his name on the console here, Censor. Censor, how you doing?
Hi, Jonathan. It's good to be here. I'm doing great. Appreciate the new nickname. Love it.
You're welcome. There's more where that came from.
I don't doubt it.
Each time you're on Spencer, he'll take one letter off your name.
Right.
So after a while, you'll usually be,
Yeah, and I won't tell you which letter. It's just going to be, you're just going to have to look.
Well, last but not least, we also have a returning guest, Casey, from Vivenna Lore, Warbreaker fame.
One of the spiciest episodes.
One of the spiciest episodes, to my recollection.
Only because you made it so spicy. Well, technically, it was both of us who made it spicy. Arguments tend to require 2 people. Otherwise, it's just talking to a brick wall.
How you doing, Casey?
Nice to be here again. Good to talk with y'all, and hopefully we'll have some more animated arguments about characters.
Hmm.
Well, we're good for that. One of us, at least.
Looking at you,
Probably
Jonathan.
Slava. It's probably Slava.
I'm good for arguments. Or not arguments.
Mm-hmm.
I'm good for anything.
Except for that one time in Madrid. But we don't have to talk about that in public.
That's for our late night podcast.
Ah, yes. Late night side quests. Adults only.
The Adult Swim.
As they tend to go.
Well, I'm excited to get this off the road here. So let's start with a quick overview of what it was like. If you're just joining us, go back to one of the previous episodes and get the plot summary, but we're going to dive in here. We've got some first-time readers. Casey, this was your first time reading it.
Yep.
Slava, your first time. And then myself, JT, and Spencer have all read it once before. So let's start with the newbies first. What are some things that stood out to you on this read-through?
Well, we need to qualify your question, because this is my first time reading Ghostwater, but not my first time reading the genre. This is the 5th book.
Yeah, I'm talking
reading.
about Ghostwater. Yep.
Specifically Ghostwater. What stood out to me in this book, we see right away in the prologue Lyndon's advancement, and it seemed like a jump. We leave him in Skysworn, and then he's far more advanced than where we leave him in this book. So that stood out to me. What I found very endearing and very cool is Yaren's vulnerability. So her character arc. We finally get to see the softer side of Yaren. And then, as I mentioned, these are the same things I mentioned in the previous episode. The big thing for me was Ethan's, let's call it, loyalty to the team, to the group, where he gives up his leadership, his throne, to lead the Aurelius family and says, no, I'm going to go with Skysworn because I got 2 people dependent on me. So those 3 things were really cool, because for me, it seemed like we have these 4 books. There's a lot happening. Lyndon's advancing, Yaren is advancing, and here, in between your usual action for this genre and for this particular story, there's these moments where things kind of settle down, and I think those are setups for whatever's coming next. You got Lyndon and Yaren now at the same level. You got Ethan sticking with them. I think this is a nice setup, and I haven't read book 6 through 12, but I think this is a setup for whatever's coming next.
Yeah, I'd say this is a lot of a setup book. It's designed to get Lyndon and Yaren on the same road, or same part of the road, so to speak, in order to keep it from being Yaren carries Lyndon on her back for, oh no, the next book again.
12 books.
Yeah. It keeps Lyndon from feeling like dead weight, and, helps his character growth to know that he isn't dead weight anymore as well. He needed to have at least one book dedicated to actually bringing Lyndon up to that point, because he can't exactly just write off, oh yeah, he advanced something between books, don't worry about it.
And that's sort of how I felt with the prologue, because when we leave him in Skysworn, he's not that advanced, and then this prologue, he is far more advanced. So I was glad to read later on, with him in the cave and Orthos and the Void Dragon dance and all the other stuff he had to do. I know some people online complained. You brought this up, Jonathan, last time.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of understand their complaints, but at the same time, as Casey and the rest of us were dropping notes in our group chat, it was a nice way to bring Lyndon up to Yaren's level.
This was in reference to the forum that was talking about how it felt unearned that Lyndon had his big power jump. Okay. What's interesting about that is that I had a somewhat opposite reaction. This felt
really?
like the first one, to me, that he had earned, truly.
Why is that?
It is a common part of the genre that there's a struggle and that there is a luck is part of that struggle. Encountering massive good fortune is something that happens. So far, he's been encountering it because people have given it to him. That's the big one. Almost all of his other power-ups are entirely gifted by someone else. This one, he wasn't given it. He stumbled onto it and struggled through it by having to fight, what's her name, Akira?
Yeah. Akira?
And Akira?
Something.
Akira Natoth?
She has a Lovecraftian name.
Mm-hmm.
So that was his struggle in there, and then he reaped the rewards of being in a place that was much higher level than he was supposed to be in.
That's a good way to look at it. I hadn't noticed that in previous reads where, okay, Copper, he needs assistance. So, what are the things that Lyndon has currently done himself? He ripped his core into,
Right?
and he left Sacred Valley.
He did that with help.
He still walked out. I'm gonna give him credit for it, because he got the vision, and he's like, oh, I need to leave so that I can come save it. So I'll give him that one. He didn't survive on his own, but he did choose to leave. What else did he do? Spencer, what do you remember from the first couple books? What else did Lyndon own and do himself that wasn't handed to him?
He did advance to iron himself, although the method for doing so was given to him.
Yeah.
I like the comparison, actually, between his advancement to iron and, the traditional method for the Venom clan, or whatever it is, the snake something. Sandvipers clan, where it's just like a drop of the venom that was given to the child to give him the iron body, and then you've got him in the corner seeping black goo out of his body while everything is going to crap around him.
Yeah.
It was a great moment.
It was a really nice moment.
One thing that stood out to me as Lyndon doing himself, although he kind of cheated, a little bit, he had to use what was available to him to ascend that mountain so he can be part of that school.
Oh, the Heaven's Glory school?
He kind of, cheat is too strong a word.
Lie, cheat, and steal?
Deceive.
Yeah, he kind of deceptively did it, right? He took a little bit of liberties, if you will, that you shouldn't have if you were truly
a little bit
doing what you were supposed to. But, it is what it is. He had no other way. Let's give him that. So I felt that was one of the first times where Lyndon, on his own, said, all right, what do I got to do to get up this hill? Whether lie, cheat, or steal, or whatever I have to do, I'll do it. Where he left, probably be the first time, as you mentioned, Jonathan. And the second time would be close after that, where he had to go up that hill, that mountain. But I want to hear from Spencer. What do you think? So far in all the books, from book 1 to book 5 here, what did you see as Lyndon doing on his own?
One thing that I've noticed about Lyndon is he's a very scrappy character. So there's definitely times where he gets things given to him. He takes advantage of things that are given to him. Things that might seem normal to everyone else in the world or just come naturally, for him they didn't originally. So he's always fighting for every little bit of advantage that he can get. And so while there are definitely certain things that are given to him, I think he's not just waiting for someone to give him things. He is fighting for whatever advantage he can get. I guess I can't really think of anything off the top of my head at the moment of things where he was given to him, or maybe areas where he advanced himself for this book. But I feel like, as you guys were saying before, I think this book is a good spot for him where he starts to really advance on his own. And with the help of Orthos, too, I think, coaching him. So
yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Spence, in the sense that he doesn't wait around for a handout. He'll do what he has to, and he'll take a handout gladly, but he does seem to want to advance on his own. When we get his inner dialogue, I'm trying to remember back 5 books now and over the last, half a year or more, I never got the sense from Lyndon, as he's described as a character or his inner thoughts, that he just wants to get a free pass, in my estimation. Even though he will lie, cheat, and steal to get ahead, it's never in a malicious way, right? The whole philosophical question, would you steal bread to feed your family? So he's not a malicious character that's wreaking havoc and destruction as he goes. And even when he does lie, cheat, and steal, it's never at the expense of anybody. Nobody that I can remember gets hurt. Nobody's hurt that he rode that wagon up the hill.
Well, the Heaven's Glory School is in shambles now, but yeah, they might disagree with you.
Listen, he's not a smug trickster. He's a struggling trickster.
Oh,
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
I like that.
I like that a lot.
He's not a Loki, that's for sure.
Fair.
Yeah, so I like the struggling trickster idea. I can definitely see that in him. You mentioned he's not like a Loki type, but like he's going to use anything to his advantage, and where it might seem, I don't know what the right word I'm looking for is, maybe not unethical, but maybe just
dishonorable.
Yeah, maybe dishonorable. Some other people in world might think it's dishonorable, but Lynn is just going to take everything, like I said before, that he can use to his advantage. And that's how he ends up winning a lot of these battles that he faces, because he's underestimated by his opponents, and they're just not used to maybe the tactics that he's going to employ to try to win these fights and to advance.
Agreed.
Right. The cornered rat will fight back as fiercely as any tiger.
He also earned, I could add this, he did steal the things from the Heaven's Glory School.
Yeah.
All the, the physical things from that one, forget what it was called, the treasure house, something like that.
Their vault.
Something like that. Yeah, the vault. I forgot about that. I don't even think that's him being a trickster. Take a movie, for example, like a silly movie like Commando, right? Although they break into the gun store and steal a bunch of guns to go save Arnold's daughter, let's say they fell upon a cache of weapons, and that helped them in the next part of the movie to rescue Arnold's daughter. I felt that was one of those things where they fell upon a cache of weapons, a vault room of things that would help them in this world, and he's like, oh, this is good, this is good, this is good, this will help me with X. He grabs what he can. He knows enough about these things to say, oh, this is something that will help me later on, and they move on.
Right, because he got that tour earlier when he was choosing his, gift for completing the stairs before the sun fell below the horizon. So he knew what to take.
Yeah, and he took things that would help him. He just didn't grab a duffel bag, stuff it full of crap, and then, walk out of the vault. he was careful. I remember he was careful in choosing. He left a lot of stuff behind. He was very careful in choosing the trinkets, for lack of a better term, the tools that would help him on his journey.
Profound heavenly treasures.
Yeah, well, Casey and I have covered this well enough, I think. What about the previous readers? You guys have read these books all the way through, from 1 to 12, numerous times. I want to hear from you. Let's start with you, Jeremy, since Jonathan yammered on for 35 minutes already.
With Ghostwater, my, I think, major point with this book is, if any of you watched the second episode of the Disney Star Wars trilogy.
No, I didn't.
Okay, so there's a whole sequence of some side characters, not the main character, going through this complicated series of tasks that end up accomplishing nothing. That's how I felt Yaren and Mercy were in this book.
Aww.
Now, there were some good parts to it. I'm not saying it was totally useless from a reading literature setup perspective, but they do a lot of fighting and running around when it's not as if he popped out into a hostile army that they would have he would have died if they weren't there.
Yeah, okay. I can see why it would feel like Mercy and Yaren didn't do anything, but I think that it felt more like a slice of life in world where they were waiting, they got cut off and were forced to take a detour. But I also understand, quote unquote, they didn't do anything, right? Like, they didn't achieve anything. Their whole goal was to go find Linden. And then it was the series of things they had to overcome to make that happen.
Right. And they didn't have a huge impact, I think, in their goal of finding Linden. He pops out of Ghostwater as he will, and they were just trying to fight to be there, but they almost died and ended up being saved by Zeal in the end.
I love Zeal.
So I don't think that you need to change a significant amount of that storyline for it to be, I think, better. As long as we added they come across an item of significance or something which happens or comes in handy later, would be, I think, a useful thing to add to that sequence to make it more meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Spencer, what about you? Anything stand out this read-through?
Yeah. So in one of your earlier episodes on this book, you were talking about how sometimes it felt like Linden advanced too quickly, or where maybe sometimes it took like a whole book for him to advance, or maybe even 2 books to advance to a new level, where in this book, he just, all of a sudden it seems for him to advance 2 levels, almost immediately. That was one of my sort of gripes with the series, is sometimes it felt like we got just a scene and all of a sudden Linden is just advanced, and it just felt like we didn't get a lead up to it. And I think that happens at some other points later in the series too, or just scenes where it seems like there should have been more, whatever leading up to, a certain scene. And so that was one of my gripes originally with the series. However, I really did enjoy this book. We have the introduction of Dross, and he was seems to be a really unique character up to this point. And yeah, I really enjoyed how Linden incorporates Dross into his spirit, into his being. Like, Dross is almost like an AI in a sense, like a sentient AI. But that was one of my favorite things, I think, about this book, was Linden finding Dross and then using him to help advance.
Yeah, Dross was a very fun character. I enjoyed him.
Dross reminded me of 2 things. His personality reminded me of, if anyone's played the Halo games, Guilty Spark, the AI in charge of the Halo ring.
Yes.
He's like, oh, great, an inheritor.
Throwback.
Oh boy, I could finally fulfill my purpose. Get me out of here.
I haven't played that in ages. Good call out.
Good call out. But his appearance reminds me of, talking about anime, the Full Metal Alchemist, the dwarf in the flask. is literally just a black ball with a big eye, a mouth, and little nub things on for arms.
Haven't seen it, but it sounds like a good time. I also feel like he looks like Guilty Spark. Orb with one eye flying around. Because, Guilty Spark was just this ball with a beam of, a light fixture lens thing. This is one of the fun things, and I think talked about this in one of the previous episodes, where Will is just taking everything fun from childhood, from Power Rangers to his new series that he's working on right now, to Pokemon with Zeal, Guilty Spark, like just taking fun stuff, reimagining it, and then selling it back to us. It's not crazy brilliant, but it is fun.
Yeah, and I think Will's ability to write characters in such a fun and winsome way, even some of the characters that you're supposed to hate. Take, for example, Lyndon's clan. You kind of chuckle, even when they're being complete dicks to Lyndon. The way maybe it's narrated helps, but I also have the Kindle book, so I read some of them as I listened to the audiobook, so I saw the text in front of me. He seems to write these guys in a very winsome, fun way. And so when you have Dross, he's not just a thing that floats around and talks to Lyndon and helps him. He has character.
Personality.
A personality, exactly. Thank you, Casey. Obviously, any good author would do this. But in this genre, specifically, the fact that everybody seems to be unique is, for me, refreshing. Oftentimes, you kind of get cutouts of characters in a book like this or in a story like this. But here, even if you only see him for half a book or for just a couple of scenes, each character seems to have personality that's unique to them. And maybe I'm overstating this, but for me, that's one of the fun things about these books is everything's moving fast, and we've mentioned that numerous times. The pacing is great, but each character has their own little spark, if you will. And that, to me, is one of my favorite things about this series.
A guilty spark, if you will. Right, Casey?
Yeah.
There we go.
I was about to say it if you didn't.
One of the things that stood out to me in this read-through, because it's been, I think I read it last year, is the most recent time prior to now, is just how fun it is. And I mentioned this to Slava as well, that this is maybe my favorite Cradle book for all of the new incorporations of a pocket world and a world that's kind of a dungeon that doesn't really go in a specific order because Lyndon can do whatever he wants. And while it is oversaturated with magic items, I love that. That's just fun to me, where it's like everything's powerful except for the main character. Okay, he got one level. Okay, he got another level. That's why I read series like this Zanzia and Wuxia type stuff. But I love it. This is one of my favorite, even though it's not Slava's favorite. But Casey made a good point earlier about it feeling like a chapter book. You did mention that earlier, right?
Not in the podcast, but in the notes.
In the notes, okay, yeah. So Casey just mentioned it.
Yeah, so it feels like all these novels, maybe it's because of how I'm reading it one after the other, but they all feel like different big chapters, each book, because we're just following the same path and picking up right where the last book left off. It's not like there's a time skip for the most part between them. I think the biggest time skip would have likely been between Skysworn and now. We saw that the prologue, how Lyndon had grown slightly. The prologue, to me, features an interesting thing. The prologue character is like a antithesis to Lyndon. He was a nobody, even though he was way higher than Lyndon ever was to begin with. He was still a nobody compared to everyone around him. And then he got an ounce of power and went completely nuts with it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that was the point, was it feels like each of these books is just another big chapter, sort of like how you read a web novel, where it's just multiple chapters one after another.
Yeah, I think that's one of the fun things about Will's writing style. And I want to say I was talking to Spencer about this not last night, 2 days ago. I don't know. I saw Spencer earlier this week, and it was a nighttime ordeal. And I was telling him about how I'm pretty sure I don't remember the timeline, so JT, if you looked into Will a little more in depth and my timeline's wrong, just correct me. But Will was writing his trilogy on, what was that, Valinor town floating island? Cool, you're all just staring at me like I'm an idiot.
I don't know. I haven't read his other series yet.
There's a couple of them. Spencer, do you remember House of Blades? House of Blades. Okay.
I haven't read that series yet.
Same.
So I have, but then this is just like my point. I think Will was really focused on House of Blades, which conceptually is really fun. And then I think his palate cleanser was Cradle, but nobody reads House of Blades from what I've seen, and everyone's reading Cradle. So, it's just interesting to me to see an author who, like, oh, this is going to be my baby, House of Blades, cool concept. And then he's like, well, I'll just write this side story. And then people are like, we want more of the side story. He's like, okay, I'll write another one. And they're like, great, give us 10 more of these books. And it like took off, and he did a Kickstarter that was over, it was $1.2 million. And like, just, you don't always know as an author what is going to hit for the audience.
Right.
Yeah, Casey, to your point earlier, I liked what you were saying about how these kind of feel like each book feels like its own chapter. And I think, Jonathan, we had talked about too before, where all 12 of these books combined is like One Way of Kings, or maybe slightly longer. Yeah. And that's honestly, that's kind of what it felt like to me as well. And I think that's why I enjoyed Ghostwater in some of these shorter books, like Skysworn, is because even though there might not be a whole lot that goes on within the book, it almost feels like a chapter because it is so short, but yet each book continues to pick up immediately after where the previous one leaves off. So yeah, I really liked that about this series.
I think it harkens back to this genre's, not roots, but how the genre works in the Chinese world. So the original Xianjia genre is mostly a web novel based art form. They don't print huge books of this. They might organize things into books, but they're released a couple chapters at a time onto a web page. They're very short chapters, and the storylines are almost always massively long. So I read
longer than the Bible.
2/3. I read 2/3 of a story. Yeah, and it's true. It is about 1,500 words a chapter, and about 2,500 chapters for the first 2/3 of this one story. That calculates out to about 1.7 million words, and that is about 5 times longer than the Bible. It's quite long, more reading than I've done for any other series, barring Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time.
Well, this is a perfect segue, JT, to talk about the genre at length. You took some notes. You gave us some notes, which were fascinating. So if you could keep them contained to this book, but talk about the genre in general and kind of tie it into this book and maybe loosely to the previous 4, that'd be great. I want to hear some of that.
Okay. So for that, I'll give a brief explainer on the words that you have been using throughout these podcasts. So you have wuxia and xianxia. Now, the correct way of pronouncing those would be wuxia and xianxia. The X is a TS sound, and the W is almost not pronounced.
Okay.
Oh, simple enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not as difficult, but if you want to, you can do wuxia and xianxia, and that's close enough because it's a little hard to pronounce the more Chinese way of doing it. But they mean literally, wuxia is martial heroes, and xianxia is immortal heroes. They are equivalent to the Western idea of low fantasy and high fantasy.
Oh.
So wuxia is more grounded,
relatively,
and more accurate to what you might think of as a fantasy version of historical China. And xianxia is, let's just take everything and go as far as possible with it. Usually it's about attaining a form of godhood. which is somewhat related to their Buddhist and Taoist religious beliefs. So it harkens back to an old book called Journey to the West, which, if you've read or watched Dragon Ball, that is the whole basis of that story. Journey to the West involves a monk searching enlightenment, traveling to India, which was real. That's a real person that lived, went to India, grabbed a bunch of Buddhist literature and brought it back to China. And his journey was made into a fantasy book some 600 years ago.
Only 600 years ago?
Yeah, it's old for us, but new for China.
Wow.
Which is funny to say.
It was during a time when there was a lockdown in China. You weren't allowed to leave, so it was a big deal that he left the country. And that story has a bunch of recognizable characters. The first character that the monk meets is Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, who rides on a cloud and has a magic extending staff.
Huh.
And if you remember in Dragon Ball, that's
Yep.
exactly what Goku is at the beginning. He's got the monkey tail, he rides the cloud, has the staff.
So you're telling me that My Childhood is actually just an ancient novel that I was lied to, and I can't become a Super Saiyan?
You got it.
True.
Yep. Too bad you amputated
And
that
the-
monkey tail you had.
I told you not to talk about that.
In Dragon Ball Z, they depart a little bit from the original story to kind of bring in that Superman-esque storyline. But in the original, a lot of the random characters that you might think are odd, why is there the magic pig that can transform into other things? Oolong is a character that's represented in the original novel as well.
Pigsy.
He was the pig demon. I forget what his name is. I can't remember Chinese names that well.
I think it literally translated something like Pigsy or something like that.
Yes, it did translate to like piggy or pigsy, which is a common thing in Chinese names. Then you have Yamcha is a version of a character that also exists in that book. The search for enlightenment is the search for the Dragon Balls. You have one of the major villains of the original Dragon Ball, the Ox King, was the major villain of the Journey to the West. And as they evolved past that and into the Super Saiyan saga, they left behind a lot, and the Ox King kind of mellowed out. He becomes the regular dad. Goku marries Chi-Chi, what have you. There's a lot there, and that forms the basis of these genres. So there's a lot of martial arts, magic powers, chi, gaining massive levels of progression, and that's mostly a Shenxia thing.
Mm-hmm.
I really do enjoy this genre, and specifically the Shenxia genre takes everything that you assume in the wuxia genre and makes it just crazy.
As you could see, the
Yes.
dial goes to 11.
Mm-hmm. Let's say in wuxia, Chinese traditional medicine is a big thing, where certain herbs and fruits and what have you can heal your body, not just by cleansing wounds, but also by making your spirit whole, because they each have different elements that they're related to, and if you mix them together in a particular way, it's an odd Chinese belief. But in Shenxia, not only is it that you can just pop a pill made out of a bunch of herbs and your arm can regrow, or you can go up 3 levels of power, or gain 200 years of life. That's a common thing in these stories.
Beans.
Yep.
Exactly, sensu beans. All of these tropes and story elements are turned up to the highest possible level, because the end result of a Shenxia novel is that the main character achieves a sort of godhood. Whereas in a wuxia novel, it's more about revenge, betrayal, brutality, and the martial arts are more grounded. Some people find that more interesting. I really like people shooting chi blasts and destroying mountains with a single finger.
Yeah. It's fun. It's fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's very fun.
Yeah, screaming at each other 3 episodes.
So I'll say there are 3, I think, major things that a Xinxia story has holds as incredibly important, something that makes up that world. The first is that it's a brutal world. This is not a world where you ever get given anything. You need to fight for everything that you get. There are no free lunches. Might makes right isn't just a saying, it's good advice. The rich get richer is the proper way of things. That's not the second element. That's part of the brutality of the world. The second element is you are looking at a main character, and the main character represents the culmination of 5 attributes. So, on the path of cultivation, there are several things that you need to have in certain amounts to succeed. The first is natural ability. You have to be smarter or better or in some way not below average here to get ahead. In terms of just any kind of natural ability. Better intelligence, better strength, or in this case, better cultivation ability just as a person. The second is you have to be incredibly determined, tenacious. Like Linden. Linden is a perfect example of this tenaciousness. Third is you need to be morally gray. Because of the brutality of the world, if you go in with the idea of, I'm going to save the world and make people's lives better, people are going to take advantage of you and you'll never make it. Yes, kind of. But even more brutal. You're not thinking brutal enough.
Well, this is an American novel. We're not allowed to put brutal things in it.
Fourth is a optimal risk-reward strategy. You need to be able to see opportunity where it lies and grab it, but not be so risk-heavy that you end up dying for something you didn't need. And the fifth and the most important aspect is blind luck. You need to get lucky several times to make it to the top.
Interesting. And this is like across the... Oh, I have a quick question just to derail you.
Go ahead.
I would find this in any other true cultivation style novel. That's my understanding?
Absolutely.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that.
In certain amounts, and they're definitely going to be different, but yes, you will find all these things. And the third thing is you're going to find a lot of Taoism and Buddhism as an assumed part of the book, which makes sense for a novel based in China, made by Chinese people, for Chinese people. It is fun looking as a Westerner at what we see as sort of an oddity, because we're looking at it on the basis from a Western side, Christian moral values generally, or Abrahamic religion. It looks and feels very alien in a way, and I love it for that reason.
Yeah, that's fun. Well, thank you for the quick deep dive on this genre type. For those not in the group chat, which is all of you listening, last night I discovered another cultivation novel that I know nothing about. If blind luck chases us down and punches us in the face, we might get into that after the Cradle series. Of course, that's ways down the road, but there might be more cultivation novels in the future. We'll find out.
One of the other big things that you see in wuxia is it's an interesting dichotomy where we as Westerners typically don't see this too much in our own novels, but honor culture is a big thing. Saving face, having face. If your face is insulted, you need to deal with it. You've got to make sure that they understand that they have not giving you the proper face, and you have to punish them for doing so. It's odd to think about from a Western perspective, but it's assumed in China.
So something Jonathan said last episode, and I want to throw it to Spencer. The question is shame useful in our world? How good is shame for us? I'll break down the question a little bit more based on my answer to him, my quick answer to him. Can shame guard us in a good way? Or is shame always a bad thing? What do you say, Spence?
I think shame can have its good place in our lives and our culture. I mean, if we didn't experience shame, I mean, I think it would be kind of a lawless society, right? People would do all sorts of terrible things because they don't have no shame. So I think there's definitely a space for it. Obviously, there's definitely a huge negative impact that shame can have on our lives. I grew up in a culture that was sort of a shame culture in a way, because I grew up in a very legalistic, almost borderline culty sort of environment, very religious and conservative. And there was a lot of kind of unspoken rules that you had to live by. Otherwise, you would get judged, you would get shunned by the community. You learned where your place was.
So in your case, you would say, Spence, that shame was used detrimentally. It was used to control, and not in any sense where it sets up boundaries, like you said just now and like I said in the previous episode, but it was used to exude control and keep you in line for the benefit of whoever was running your community, the cult-like environment you grew up in. It was used to keep you in check, but not in any way that would be beneficial for you as an individual or for the group in general, but it kept the cult leaders in control.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. There was no benefit to the individuals within the church. It was all about the leadership maintaining control, which honestly to me feels a little bit weird because it was only a church of like 200 people. It's not like it was a huge movement or like, this big deal, but for whatever reason, it was like it gave the authority this sense of control that, they were controlling other people's lives. And I mean, sure, they tried to pass it off as it was a benefit to you, right? They always try to sell that. Like, oh, if you do this, then God will bless you. And if you live this way, God's favor will shine on you. And but it was all these legalistic, made up, man-made rules that don't even have any scriptural basis. But for whatever reason, they would use scripture to back up their own legalistic rules. So yeah, shame was definitely, and if you didn't follow those rules, right, then they would shame you. And that's why you just learned to like follow the rules, just fall in line. Otherwise, your community would get taken away from you because you would get shunned. And so that's, a little bit of my experience with maybe this sort of honor shame culture. And the honor part was, there was no honor in helping out, your fellow congregants. It was more about how you can boost leadership, how you can honor them, what you can do for them. And it was never about what they can do for you.
So the Heaven's Glory School.
Yeah. Well, it's funny.
Yeah, exactly.
I think both Spencer and I went to different campuses of that school. My exposure to a few cultic churches that my mom dragged me to, it was the same exact thing. And I remember some of the rules. Maybe, Spencer, you can share if you're comfortable. One of the rules that was absolutely cuckoo banana town crazy was you couldn't wear the color red because it was sultry, and you couldn't wear ties. Men were discouraged from wearing ties.
No ties?
No
because
ties.
they were
That's
pagan. It was a pagan symbol of something or a pagan article of clothing, and it pointed to hell.
The ding-a-ling.
Wow. Interesting.
And I remember this from a sermon. This wasn't like somebody told me this in the back because they were punking, the new guy. This was said in Sunday school and from sermons about why they don't wear ties and how we are different. And yes, other churches don't understand us, but we are following our leaders who have an understanding of the scriptures and God's word that outshines the neighboring churches.
Outshines.
Hey, Jesus, can we get an opinion on ties? They didn't exist in your time? Thank you very much.
Outshines the neighboring churches.
Yeah. I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah, no, that's true though.
Yeah.
That sounds like Christianity 101. All right, folks.
Yeah.
We're here to outshine the county next door. What are we going to do? We're going to praise the Lord. When are we going to do it? Loudly. Right now.
And take off your ties.
Take off your
Take off your ties. No ties, no red. Hey, Tommy, take off your shirt.
None of that devil worship.
For any of you listeners at home, this is totally true. If you're wearing a tie, you should feel bad about it, okay? Take it off right now. Right now.
We won't know, but we will know.
We will know.
It's a noose that drags you to hell.
God knows that you're wearing that tie. Take it off.
Yeah, we had similar rules in my church growing up, but for men, you wore suits and ties to church because that was your best.
Heathens.
I know.
God has to see you in your best, otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. It was your best, and the example that was given a lot was like, well, if the president showed up to your house, you'd be wearing your best. So Jesus is more important than the president, so you got to wear, your best every Sunday. And
Yep.
And for women, they were not allowed to wear pants.
Of course not.
That was a huge no-no. I mean, that was Satan's way of deceiving the women into all sorts of immorality. So
Naturally.
All sorts of it.
Yeah. So that was one of them, and then a couple other just like random ones. Like we weren't allowed to go to movie theaters,
Yep.
and men couldn't have long hair.
You finish, and I'll tell a story about movie theaters.
Okay. Like I said, those are just some of the crazy sort of rules. And we did, what is it? We were similar to Jehovah's Witness, right? Where we would go door to door and invite people to church and try to, share the gospel with them. Well, our version of the gospel.
Right.
And so just a lot of, and that was the only way, or maybe one of the best ways that you show your devotion to God. And it was like, yeah, it was just, yes, sorry, Jonathan. It's like, what is Jonathan doing over there?
Jonathan's taking off his clothes.
Get distracted.
I'm coming in my best to worship the Lord.
Thanks, Jonathan, for that distraction there.
Yeah.
I put a superhero mask on for those who aren't in the know.
So that's just Slav. That's just a couple of random, like, super,
Just a goof.
man-made rules that was used to enforce control by the leadership.
So my movie theater story.
Oh boy,
There we go.
It's more of a TV story, but same. We couldn't watch TV. I mean, I had a TV and I watched TV because I couldn't care less. And my mom was,
didn't you watch Goosebumps and stuff?
yeah.
That can't be Christian.
No, it's not. And my mom was kind of loosey-goosey. She was in the church, and then she would jump to a different church. We tried Mormonism for a while. We tried Jehovah's Witnesses for a while. So whatever was happening at home, TV-wise, we weren't long enough at any church for that to sink in, but we were all always part of some kind of cultic faction of each of the churches. Anyway, I remember being told you couldn't watch TV in this church at all. TV's bad, movies are bad. Maybe once in a while you can find a good Christian story or a TV show, but they were one in a million. And nobody at the church was allowed to own a TV. And then one day I found myself at an elder's house because I was hanging out with his son or something. And, well, like 6 of us were hanging out with his son. And what do I see in the family room?
Oh, sorry, I'll wait.
A TV. Not only a TV with a VCR.
Whoa.
And I think they saw my look of confusion or contempt or both. And they're like, well, this is because he's an elder and he needs to screen things that we show at church. I was like, uh-huh.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yep. I had a good bullshit detector even when I was a kid. And I think I'm 13 at this point. 13 or 14. And I was like, oh, okay. Yep. I just filed that away in my brain, but I was like, yeah, okay, you're full of crap.
Wild.
Yeah, but that's what, leadership in those, in these culty, type settings, what they'll do is like, it's bad for you, but I can do it because I'm the man of God, or I'm the leader, or was appointed to be in this position specifically to, in this case, I have the TV because I need to screen things, and they always twist it to make it sound like it was God's special appointment for them to preview these things, or to, like, I can have them so that I can make sure you're not going to fall into sin.
Hitler did the same thing.
Yeah.
We don't have to get into that, but that's anyway.
How long can the conversation on the internet last until it reaches the topic of comparing something to Hitler?
47 minutes?
47 minutes and 36 seconds.
38 seconds?
Apparently.
Yeah.
And
not
Hitler.
including the previous recording time.
Oh, this is the
That's
first time.
right. Oh,
no, we
yeah,
mentioned
that's
Hitler
true.
before. I mentioned Hitler as a character archetype where certain characters are just meant to be bad. And,
Oh, no, he's talking about this episode.
Oh, this episode,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
the first time Hitler is mentioned.
Yeah. It's been more than 48 minutes.
For those
Sorry,
not
go
in the know, JT turned off his camera. Now he's wearing a tie. I'm wearing a superhero mask, and Slava put on shades. And Casey and Spencer are probably changing into their costumes as well. So
They're switching clothes.
Well,
To
I'm
red.
still
They're-
here,
they're
so
gonna
that's
wear
not
red.
Right.
Well, I just noticed, holy cow, JT's wearing a red tie. That's amazing.
wow.
He just mentioned it.
I literally also just said it, but
Whatever.
are you drunk?
I had to stop drinking in the morning.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
the dog.
Woof.
That's why the
I think-
shades.
Yeah. You can't see the bloodshot eyes. He's on a bender. He hasn't stopped since last night. But he's not an alcoholic. He's allowed to do this.
Yeah, I'm a functioning alcoholic.
He's a God-fearing man.
a God-fearing, functioning alcoholic.
That's right. Oh man.
You want to join my cult?
Don't let the forces of big sobriety come after you.
I think we talked about this. I'll be your prophet.
That's right. We started off this podcast, I think the first or second episode, where we pitched the idea of creating a cult and our listeners could be our followers. But yeah, you're my prophet and I'm the guy behind the curtain.
Don't go back to listen to the early episodes because,
They're trash.
well, they're there. That's true too.
You can make good money if you're a cult leader. You got to learn how to do it right. You can make some pretty good money.
Yeah. Well, with Spencer's and my exposure to cults, we could have a good thing going, man. We know the background.
This is gonna get us on a government list.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Cult of Side Quests. Donations are accepted.
That's right. The only way to please us is to by going on your own side quests.
First 50 cult members get 10% off our booklets. Promo code Hitler.
Signed copies of the booklets. Okay. All right.
That's enough of that. I think we've finished this side
Off
quest.
the rails over here. Maybe he has been drinking. I'm going to shame you. Shame you. So when is shame useful? We talked about some times when it wasn't useful, but we don't want people walking around with their pants off in the middle of the street. We have nude beaches for that. So we purposely do shame parts of the culture, less here in the West, but certainly a bit, to stay in line. So where's the separation between useful shame and unuseful shame, to put it in more simple terms?
I wanted to quickly bring up, there is a recognized dichotomy between guilt cultures and shame cultures. That is a researched phenomena, and it is somewhat parallel or related to the kind of religious beliefs of those areas.
What is the difference between a shame culture and a guilt culture as a precursor, as a primer?
So shame cultures use external force to shame people into not doing bad things that are against the culture's values. Guilt culture uses your internal force to prevent you from doing that. Because of how those two things work, you need a certain belief in order for them to be viable. So guilt cultures work because they generally come with a Christian or Abrahamic background of there is a God that is all-powerful. He knows what you think and everything you do. You can't hide anything from him. So the only thing that you can do is confess, ask for forgiveness, and move on.
North Korea is the same. If you've ever seen that woman who escaped, can't remember her name for the life of me, but she talked about how they're taught to believe that the Kim Jong-un has psychic powers and knows if you have any bad thoughts. And so they're guilted into, at least based on what you just described, they're guilted into not doing anything.
Right. And then shame cultures are cultures where it's up to everybody around you to prevent you from doing bad things. So they follow along with an idea of there's no person at the top, no being at the top of the hierarchy that is requiring you to act a certain way. You can hide from them. You can escape punishment for doing what you might consider wrong things. And so the idea of honor became a big deal because the best that you have, the best thing that you can possess is a good reputation. And your reputation is just the idea of you from other people around you. Mm-hmm. So honor and shame becomes a good tool to harm somebody with because it directly harms their reputation.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, both cultures have each in a mix. It's not like shame cultures are without guilt. It's not like guilt cultures are without shame.
I was thinking that because it seems hard to draw a line between like, hey, don't let other people shame you. You need to feel guilty. Like you can't enforce that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think it does follow with the way that you see Western ideas and Eastern ideas sort of where the line that separates them happens. In Western cultures, because it's a guilt culture, there's a focus on what is morally absolutely correct, an objective worldview of this is wrong completely. It's not it's wrong because I got caught. It's this thing is just wrong. Versus in Eastern cultures, a lot of times you can get away with doing bad things and it's excused as long as you get away with it. They just kind of live with the idea that these things happen because you need to have an external force. It's not that you did bad, it's that the culture did bad by not stopping you. There's no absolute moral correct. It's more about your personal success. You're trying to optimize your gain in life, and sometimes that hurts other people, and that's okay as long as it doesn't affect your reputation.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've seen movies, Eastern movies from the East, obviously dubbed in English, but I've seen a swath of them. And that type of stuff, those ideals you mentioned, are prevalent in the movie. And the way it's presented, when you do an in-world critique, it's blatantly obvious that there's moral gray there, and the bad guy, quote-unquote, doing whatever bad things, quote-unquote, is excused in the movie. The way the story flows, it is excused, overlooked, or given the apologetic, if you will, that you just described. So absolutely. Absolutely. Now, do we see that in Will Wight's books here? In any of the stories we read so far?
I mean, we sort of see it with Ethan, in a way, where he's somewhat of a subversion of that. He's constantly being shamed by other people for his behavior, and then he just refuses to let it get to him. Yep. He's like, oh, that's great comment there. I don't care.
Or, apologies, Emperor, but I still don't care.
I'm sorry. I respect you as the Emperor, but as a friend, I'm entering anyway.
Yeah.
I think the characters we follow are products of the honor culture, but in the way where they started at the bottom, if they've had to fight for everything. So Yaren, to a point that JT brought up a little bit ago, where it's like, you have to fight for your right. Well, Yaren is the epitome of that. Lyndon shows some of it too, but he has an incredible determination, not entirely morally gray at the moment, but has a huge risk-reward structure and pushes until he gets his blind luck. So at least, maybe not all of those things, because I don't think he had a natural ability until he built it. But I think we see some of these key things here throughout different characters.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, Jonathan. These characters are all byproducts of this culture. And where Lyndon comes from, I think he's heavily influenced by the shame culture of his clan. Because even he's an embarrassment to the clan of no doing of his own. Just because he's born without a core, his family is shamed, and then the clan at large is also shamed, or they feel shame. right? It's kind of self-imposed shame that Lyndon is an embarrassment. He brings dishonor to the clan.
Right. He's bad not because he's actually objectively bad for some reason, but because his presence dishonors his family.
Mm-hmm.
It decreases their reputation, regardless of, it's not his fault, obviously, for being born without a certain tendency towards one of those one areas of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
Don't we even see that a little bit too with Mercy and her family? She was set up to take on this role, and she subverted that because she was supposed to marry Harmony, and nice Santa hat, Casey. Sorry, just thought I would acknowledge that.
Bringing the gifts to town.
But she didn't play her part, right? She just did her thing. She was herself, and it was better than Harmony. She beat him, or whatever it was, in a fight.
He doesn't take losing well.
Yeah, and he didn't take losing well, and then her mother, Mercy's mother, sort of, I don't know if excommunicated is the right word, but maybe banished her for a while, to try to hey, you need to go and essentially figure yourself out, and then maybe come back later and try to get back in our good graces, sort of thing. And so there was that shame, right, where she was shamed because she didn't follow the path that was set out for her by her family.
Yeah. I think that the honor culture shame conversation, and JT and Spencer will know what I'm implying and referring to. This is something that we're going to come up again with, as well as some of these characters level up, where they have to address their beliefs. So if there's any final thoughts, like, you can wrap them up, but I think that this is something that we'll have to pull out again, joyfully, but pull out again later. We can access the joy icon and bring it out and address the honor culture, shame culture when said characters do said things.
I will end my thought on the closest representation in Will Wight's book to what I've seen in other books in the genre from the Chinese perspective was Sacred Valley. Sacred Valley is the epitome of the entirety of all the cultures that are within Xianxia genre books. The amount of stuck-upness, the refusal to help anybody below them, that is very indicative of these stories, very a strong part of them. I think he did a really good job at, later in the rest of these books, blending a more Western value system to his Eastern-styled world.
Yeah, final thought for me, maybe on the honor shame, is JT said there's a refusal to help those that are below you, and it just kind of sparked a thought in me of like how I grew up. It was, so a little bit of context in Christianity, the idea is that God comes to you and like he's pursuing you. In my church growing up, like they preached that, but it was like you have to still do all of these rules in order to be accepted by God. And that's not how the gospel is portrayed in scripture. And so for me, I feel like I have maybe a little bit of experience with that. I was like, well, you have to do X, Y, and Z before we can help you, before, we'll do these things for you. That's just my experience with it. So yeah, I guess that's final thoughts there. But maybe as we transition a little bit, going into experiences with hard and soft magic systems, what are your guys' experience with those sorts of like soft versus hard magic systems?
Well, for me, thanks to Jonathan, I've experienced soft and hard magic systems for the first time for this podcast. Shut up, Jonathan.
I didn't say anything.
Lean into the microphone like you were going to.
I didn't say anything. Guilty or no, innocent until proven guilty. That's what I want to say.
Most of my fiction reading was either sci-fi, horror, psychological, supernatural horror, the speculative fiction of Philip K. Dick and other authors like him, stuff like that, transgressive stuff like Chuck Palahniuk. That was my bread and butter, for lack of a better term, when I was reading for personal enjoyment. Now, getting into this project with Jonathan, I was exposed to the fantasy of Sanderson, and for those of you who've been with us for a while, you'll know that my fantasy exposure prior to this was I read The Lord of Rings and The Hobbit, and that's where I stopped with any fantasy novels. So this is my first experience with it. To say anything else with confidence or anything that is meaningful, I'm not sure I can, because I'm still wrapping my head around. And part of this project is me reacting and kind of slowly as we go along absorbing this stuff. So my comments on it are in real life as you go. I haven't had enough exposure to it. Not yet. I'm just dipping my toes in it, these worlds and these type of genres. But you guys are the seasoned ones, so educate me, enlighten me.
I mean, Brandon Sanderson is like the king of hard magic systems, as has been said before. He comes with a magic system and then says, okay, now I have to impose limits. And those limits are more important than what I can actually do with the magic system. Soft magic is mostly, from what Jereremy has told me, all wuxia and zhanja is all about. It's, what if this was something cool? Let's do that. And then they do that. And that's how some magic systems, like Harry Potter's magic system, it's soft magic. Oh yeah, there's this potion that gives you extreme luck. How does that work?
Yeah, I think that's a good example. There seems to be a lot of, and I think to your point, Casey, Sanderson might be the father of hard magic, just because he started talking about how he made his rules of magic. And I vaguely recall a conference that I read the transcript of later where he spoke about, oh, I couldn't wait to be on this panel with these guys who had these great magic systems. And they basically said, like, well, we just make it up as we go along. And he's like, what? No, you got to have rules. You got to have rules for your systems. Otherwise, anything can go. And then he started developing his 3 rules for hard magic, which, Spencer, do you mind looking that up for me and then reading it in a minute after I make another point here?
Yeah.
With soft magic systems, and this is why I love Cradle, and I love both of them separately, is pretty much whatever you invent imagination-wise, you can kind of just make fit. And then you just keep moving forward, and you do need to, not retcon, but you do need to make sure that things, and I think, JT, you brought this up in one of our chats, like, things need to be forgotten. Like, oh, well, that's not powerful enough. Like, oh, well, that's not a thing that you have to keep anymore. Do you remember that line of thought you mentioned?
So it's a common thread in these that not everything that you learn is going to be as impactful at the end of your journey as it was at the beginning. You're going to come across an item, or you'll make a particular friend or acquaintance that they're important for a book, a few hundred chapters, what have you. But at some point, you grow far enough past them that it no longer becomes useful, and you stop using it. It doesn't have to be a big deal in these books that you kind of move past certain things. And the fun thing about this, and I see these books, the Xianxia stories, as sort of like simulations that you might find on YouTube of like evolving creatures, where you might, they can come across things or make a change, and at some point that change is impactful. And then later down the line, several, hundreds, thousands of years of simulated time later, that thing is no longer useful, and so you discard it. To me, this is the very same thing. You find something, maybe it's useful, maybe it's not. Maybe this thing seems like it's going to be important, but it's a red herring from the author, and the main character loses it in the next fight, or it's not as useful as it was supposed to be, and they sell it to somebody. Or it just becomes used a couple times and then forgotten as more powerful things come in that replace it. There's a realism to that, where if you lived in a world that did have this structure, then if you attempted to make everything that you gained constantly useful to you, it would actually be hampering you rather than helping you. I think that is this a good time for Spencer to read out the 3 laws or 3 rules.
Yeah, so in Sanderson's Laws of Magic, he's got the first one is an author's ability to solve conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands the magic. And then the second one is limitations are greater than powers. The third law is expand what you already have before you add on something new.
I don't know what inspired him to decide that these were the 3 laws of hard magic systems, but I will say it has made him a very, very successful author. JT and Casey, have you guys read... Well, Casey, you were on Warbreaker, so I know that you've read at least one Sanderson book. JT, have you read Sanderson?
Not a huge amount. My involvement with Sanderson has basically not gone beyond the Wheel of Time series that he finished for the late Robert Jordan.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Interesting. Well, we should get you to read some of those too, because I'd be curious, especially with your knowledge about cultivation genre, because I keep calling it progression fantasy, and maybe there's a difference, and if you're aware of a difference, feel free to just correct me, but I call cultivation genre progression fantasy. But I'd be curious to hear your input on how Sanderson makes his hard magic systems across the Cosmere against other cultivation novels that are just equally as fun, but are more whimsical, if I can use that term.
And you're right about the cultivation genre being a type of progression fantasy. It definitely is.
Oh, yeah. A type?
Yeah, it is a... Well, I just essentially mean that it is an Eastern flavor of progression fantasy.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, do you know of, like, multiple types of progression fantasy? Because I really haven't done enough research on it. I just keep looking for books that are in the genre of progression fantasy, which is, I think, why I like the cultivation stuff.
If you could put all of progression fantasy into a single pot, cultivation would be a subset of that pot.
Makes sense. Spencer, so you read these for us. Do you think that Will Wight does any of these?
That's a good question. I don't think so from my point of view. I feel like he just adds things. So one of the things that I always found fascinating in the series was all the different paths that people can take. And they can kind of make up their own, right? Lyndon makes up his path of twin stars. And I always thought that there was a certain limit, only a certain number of paths that people could take. And like everyone chooses, one of these, I don't know, I guess I'm just throwing out a random number 12, let's say, paths that people can take. And yet we see Lyndon just kind of doing his own thing with creating a path. So to me, I'm like, well, can people just do whatever they want? Or is there a set sort of limit to what people can do in this world, with the magic and with all of the items? I mean, there's so many different items. We constantly see new items being thrown in, constantly see new different techniques. Like, is there a limit? I don't know. I don't find that out, or I don't know if that's ever established. So I don't know if Will really follows these laws of magic, at least in my opinion or experience. Like, what do you guys think?
One of the big things with progression fantasy is that the rule of cool trumps any of the rules of limitations. The rule of cool.
I can see
rule
that.
number 4.
I want to be able to read something that's cool. I want to see my guy flick a mountain and it just goes flying off into the distance. I don't care if it's not physically possible to do so. That's cool.
Fair enough.
Will Wight certainly follows some of those things, like we're never explained, how the limitations of Ethan's ability works. How the heck does he parry something with a pair of scissors? How does he, beat down a whole group of sacred artists with nothing but a janitor's broom? He doesn't explain that to you, especially not in the book that he shows that to you. So
yeah, I often compare this, and I think I've stolen this from Jonathan, but this is shown in anime in book form, right? And the fun thing about anime is that sometimes it's just bonkers. Like, really crazy, cool stuff happens all the time, and you're given very little explanation for it. You just assume, like, yep, this is a thing that happens in this world. It won't work in every genre, and this is why the genre stands by itself. That's fun. That's enticing. Like, I enjoy the craziness of the world, where Lyndon is doing that dragon aura dance, and his hand is like choking a fish, and things are happening, and everything's burning around him in a whirlwind. That's awesome. It's an escape Like when you read these kind of stuff, you're able to portal into a different world, and you can enjoy the story, and you can do everything that we're doing, dissecting the literary aspects of it. The other side of the coin is it's just fun to read crazy stuff like that for me.
Yeah, it's a good time. Now we are approaching about an hour and a half in our episode, so let's wrap this episode up with some love it and hate it segment. Things that you loved, things that you hated, characters, POV characters, non-POV characters, quotes, key moments, top 1 or 2 items. So characters, non-POV characters, quotes, key moments, something else that stood out to you of a love it or hate it ordeal with this book as we bring this to a close.
I'll say that Dross as a character, and somewhat as an item as well, is an important aspect to the story. He's filling in a more interesting, in-universe way to what these cultivation novels tend to do. In cultivation novels, when you go up in level, several things tend to happen. You tend to grow more beautiful, more tall, your memory and mental acuity become better, and your body overall becomes stronger. And your lifespan increases significantly. The further up you go, the more these things enhance, and it's generally a point that these novels use that you get an eidetic memory. And Dross is sort of fulfilling that in an in-universe way for Lyndon.
JT, I want to make a mental or verbal note real quick. For the next book, when you come on for the guest episode, if you can take some of these criteria for cultivation, and if you have a chart, or you can find a chart, I'd be super curious on like the criteria for cultivation novels versus things that are fulfilled in each of the different books. Not in a detailed, you don't need to write a 15-page essay, but I would like to know, like, okay, these couple are in the first book. That'd be super interesting, and I think a great talking piece for the next time you're on.
Sure.
Going off of what JT just said, Dross specifically, I'm going to share a favorite quote of mine. It had me laughing in the car. Lyndon had to ask something that couldn't possibly be a predetermined response. What is your favorite flavor of pie? I'm not a pie construct, am I? What I know about pie could fill a little tiny scoop to eat soup. A spoon? No, that can't be right. That's ridiculous. Spoon? Get out of here with your nonsense words. I love Dross for those kind of moments. There's so many quotable quotes in this book, especially in the bloopers, which I told Jonathan I loved the bloopers in this book more than any of the other. They just seemed a little bit more insane.
Out of left field. I'd say one of the things I loved was the moment where Orthos is trying to be the voice of reason to Lyndon, which is the exact opposite of everything we expect from him by this point. Lyndon, calm down. Looks at Orthos. Are you still my dragon turtle?
Yep.
He's drunk.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Oh dear,
it's written like a movie. So
yeah,
I mean
that
works.
Right.
Feel like that works.
One of my favorite scenes in the book is when Harmony has taken Dross from Lyndon, and Lyndon feels now like there's no way out, right? I think Case is kind of maybe the area where you were saying where Orthos kind of becomes this sort of like mentor figure in a way to Lyndon. But Lyndon is just kind of devastated. He doesn't know what to do, where to go. I don't know if he feels like there's an exit out. And Orthos says to Lyndon, it's probably my favorite quote in the book. This really stood out to me. He said, "Lyndon, your weakness is thinking that you are weaker than you are." I feel like that we can apply that to our lives, right? Because, well, especially like for me right now is Jonathan. He's been kind of helping me, like as I try to transition careers, and one of the things that I'm struggling with is just this feeling of inadequacy, incompetence. Jonathan's been kind of almost using that same quote on me in a sense, like like you can do this. You're stronger than you think you are, and so when I was reading the book and I read that quote, and I listened to the book, so when I heard the quote, but that really jumped out at me. It was like your weakness is thinking that you're weaker than you are, and I think we often think that about ourselves. So that was probably one of my favorite scenes in the book.
It's such a good scene. I love it.
And I think it's across the board. Everybody in this world feels at times, unless you're a sociopath or a confirmed narcissist, feels like they're inadequate in different degrees, right? Because we're all different people, but that quote's applicable to all of us, even on this panel here.
Right.
So,
Yep.
It's also definitely applicable to Zeal, my go-to guy.
I guess
Love
I'll just
him.
die.
Yeah, Zeal.
Guess I'll just don't steal my quote. This is my quote. I get to talk about my quote. Okay, so there's a moment where Zeal goes back to the Beast King, and the Beast King's like, "We gotta go help a couple golds out." He's like, "Okay, well maybe I'll just go die." Thanks for ruining it, Slava. Really appreciate that.
That's what I'm here for.
The good old Eeyore of the Wushu world.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
bother.
JT, another verbal. I want to know if there's any like trope characters, and it sounds like Journey to the West. There's more to unpack here in future episodes, which I'm really looking at you to lead us into that.
There's a couple of ideas. One of them was the naming structure that Will Wight has in these books. Just on the face of it, you have the guy who is a complete sad sack is named Zeal.
Mm-hmm.
You have the Akura clan, which is definitely supposed to be some flavor of Japanese. You've got the Sacred Valley artists, which are definitely Chinese, and I think that even extends into the Black Flame Empire. It's very Chinese. But did you notice that Will Wight was giving a hint to people when he named Ethan's clan the Aurelius clan? Unlike everybody else in the Black Flame Empire, their name is of Roman origin. It ends with an us, which indicates that it's not from that area. And his name goes at the end of the name, not the beginning. He's following a different naming structure.
Crap.
Oh, yeah.
I noticed that. I didn't give it any much more thought than, oh, well, that's kind of weird. It has a Roman name.
Yeah, the names are weird.
Yeah, I had the same experience like Slava. Like I noticed it, the Aurelius, like Marcus Aurelius, famous Roman emperor, in how the name comes after. Like in the Akura clan, it's always Akura Mercy or Akura Malice, right?
Wei Shi Linden.
Jai clan.
Yeah, but I didn't give any further thought, so that's interesting.
See, it's tidbits like that, JT, that I'm super excited to hear more about in the next episode of Cradle, Book 6, which is... Someone help me out here.
Underlord.
Underlord. Can't wait.
I'm looking forward to it. I have the whole explanation because the process of achieving Underlord status is interesting. It's definitely a Will Wight special, but it has a small through line with the the source material. There is a connection there that's a little bit tenuous, but I'll give a whole explanation of the general levels of cultivation in these novels.
Oh, fun. Can't wait. That's a good teaser.
Yes, sir.
Well, friends, thanks for joining us on SideQuest. JT, happy to have you debut. Casey, good to see you again. Spencer, you're just like a bestie now. You're just on the podcast. You're my go-to guy.
Always good to be here.
And my Russian.
I'm here.
Yeah, drunk.
Not even friend, just your Russian.
Yeah. We were friends at once, and then that stopped, and then now he's just my Russian.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan's just crazier than a nest full of squirrels, as Dross would say.
That is true.
And audience, thank you for joining us today. Make sure to rate us on your favorite podcast platform. It helps us get in front of more people. Don't forget to share us with your book-loving friends. And we will see you next time on SideQuest.